impacted our operators. It's made it a lot easier to train them. They don't have to remember near as much as they used to. We have an operator that joined right before we got him to Steelhead, and an operator wasn't paying attention. You know, they didn't look at their job card of what that load was, and they're just autopiloting to what the standard process was, but it was a non-standard process. And he looked at his scanner. Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to go in this tank. And he came and talked to me. He's like, there's something weird about this load. For some reason, he just hadn't picked up on what that load was. And it saved us thousands of dollars that day because it was a non-standard load. It went into a tank that most of our processes don't do. Yeah, we would have had to redo that whole load. It makes life easy for them. They know where they need to go. It tells them how long they can stay, how much longer they have before it has to come out of that tank. They know all they have to do is make sure they're looking at the right load, and if they're not, and they try to select the wrong load, they scan somewhere, it's going to be like, oh, you're not on the right load. This is not the correct tank you need to go to. It limits failure. With new employees on Steelhead, we had an operator that started with it just before the rollout, so he learned a little bit on the old system, which was manual timers and having to remember everything. And after Steelhead, I didn't really have to focus on tanks. I mean, he still needed to learn the standard times, but the scanner did most of the teaching for me. Pulling the scanner line wasn't too difficult. Once you had the QR codes up on your tanks, after that it was relatively easy. A little bit of a different mindset with, you got to scan into every tank and then, make sure your timer is running. But outside of that, it was not a difficult transition for us. Measurements in a lot of the tanks, but we find that sometimes the temperature sensor will go out, and so we do a manual check daily to make sure our sensors don't. It's measuring. This is just so that we know our sensors are fine.
If you have a spec attached to a part in Steelhead and you're moving them through production, you may wonder, how does Steelhead indicate to the operator that a spec input is required? If we look at this work order, you can see that we have 20 parts in production that are ready for anodizing. We're going to move these parts forward into the anodizing station. And once our parts are done being worked, our operators are going to move these parts forward. At this point in production, we're going to get an indication that says additional spec measurements are required for this part. Steelhead will not allow the operator to move these parts forward without the spec input. If we scroll down here, we can see that we have a sensor with the spec field attached. With the parameterizations listed, we simply have to hit the tape measure, input our spec value, comment if necessary, and apply this to our parts. Come back up to the top and try to move these parts forward. Steelhead will allow us to do so. If we want to see a historical accumulation of our sensor data, we simply have to come to the home screen, click on the maintenance tile, select the sensor dashboard, select the dashboard in which we want to see our data. You can see our different sensor types, the locations, the last measurement taken, any comments if written, the status of when it was last measured. If you scroll down to the bottom, we have our historical values of all our sensor data. If we want to see this in a singular view, we simply have to hit the eye indicator. We can see our last 5 measurements taken. You can see the parameterizations of each sensor. You can also update our latest sensor measurement. Again, write a comment if necessary. We can customize our dashboard as we'd like by simply dragging and dropping our sensors. If we wanted to delete a sensor off the dashboard, we simply hit the trash can.
Requirement for water break tests. So basically, if we have non-blasted parts like these that are big and smooth and easy to look right now, what we're looking for is like a clean water break as it comes out of the tank. So if it's budding up in droplets, that infers that there's a lot more oil left on the parts. And the intention of this entire process is to try to get them as clean of oil as humanly possible. So as soon as it comes out of this guy, and we'll go in here, I'll show you what I mean. So what's going to happen here is once I get into this next tank, as soon as I scan into it, it's going to pop up with that spec reading of what it wants me to do. drop this guy down, and I will start the timer, and it'll pop up with a spec requirement for water break test. And what it's looking for is either a pass or a, obviously, fail, non-pass, or a non-applicable, depending on the type of part. But basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently lift this guy up, and I'm going to check for this big plate's like a perfect example for it. But I'm going to check how that water runs off of it, and if it's a smooth, like clean runoff along the entire side, then presumably we're all clean from all of our oils and stuff like that. I will drop it back down because it looks pretty good to me. And just type in a pass here in the value. This isn't a numerical value. That's PAAS, pass. Just to say that, you know, we checked it when it got through that tank, and it looks like it's as clean from oil as we're gonna get it.
The one thing that we found with the scanner line is it brought consistency between operators. So for example, before, I mean this is a while ago we had this operator, we couldn't figure out how he was going so fast. Like he could move loads through the line very quickly. But we realized, especially after Steelhead, he wasn't staying in the rinse tanks very long. So Steelhead allowed us to make it all consistent between operators. Like just keep it consistent, that way all the operators are doing everything the same. This one we're going to go over to nickel. The scanner line really helps with, because it's not like a tank or anything, but it's a special process that we do. Like I actually have a node, it's just there for anything, like any kind of extra thing that needs to happen before a tank. And then they'll see that and it'll stop them in their tracks. That's the main thing I look to. It's so hard to do something wrong.
Steelhead's been quite interesting. It's pretty good for double checking exactly like how each one of our loads run. Because basically every single load in here runs a different process, different specs, different colors, different thicknesses, all of that kind of thing. And that's funny, like, Steelhead kind of dumbs it down pretty nicely. Because it's essentially just which tank am I going into next. You know, there's not a ton to keep track of, and it can all be consistent throughout entire work order, so we don't have to worry about changing it for each individual load. It's all consistent, it's concise, and it helps me know where I'm going next, and it won't let me go places I'm not supposed to. It's been an interesting transition. I think overall, though, I do quite like it, and the scan gun is definitely the icing on the cake in terms of just convenience. I would say it was pretty intuitive to figure out. The premise itself is pretty simple, and from my aspect of things, is I'm just scanning QR code to QR code. And Steelhead in itself will tell me pretty conveniently all of my loads that I have in the line, all of my individual, how much time's left on them, what tank they're going to next, etc. Generally, it was an easy pickup process. I prefer the iPad for doing the maintenance work stuff where I'm scrolling through a lot of different logs, but the scanner gun for my job, being on the line and mostly just scanning in and out of tanks and whatnot, is pretty much perfect. I mean, it's really a better format than the holster gun, so it works well, and pretty, actually, kind of surprised how well it lets you scan into things even from distance. I've sniped from like 10 feet away before, because I, have my hands tied with something else, and it just works. It's a good system. Sometimes we'll have multiple flight bars connected to the same physical flight bar in the tank, because it'll be two different processes on the same bar. So we'll have like a black, half black parts, half clear parts, something like that. And then you go to different tanks, we'll have different sub-flight bars in here. And being able to switch over the second button option here, going to process multiple racks, and then being able to select two at a time, we can carry it all through the line up until that point where it needs to split, and then go their separate ways, go through the individual processes the way that they need to, and then recombine them at a later date. And it all pops up like two loads that need to go to the same spot. Once they group back together, it'll pop up in the scanner here. I'll see a second option. If I'm moving like flight bar 8 and I get it through black dye, and I go through the first rinse and the second rinse. If I have a clear load that's just sitting back there waiting, that'll pop up as soon as it's ready to reunite and go into the next tank together, which is nice for me not, you always want to have like redundancies in any process ever. Like redundancies are good because if I'm a human being, I might forget something, and having it physically pop up there and remind me, we had an immediate drop in the number of failures and like user errors and stuff like that that we would have. This is, a normal occurrence. We're all human. Stuff happens. All of that dropped down when we started going to Steelhead because we get reminders on things. Like I said, maybe idiot-proof. Maybe that's a perfect term, but it essentially is. It's nice. It's an extra safeguard on top of it, which is always fun. One of my main things was zero etch and parts that get etched. It's super, 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 super common for us to run like type 2 bar that'll have some parts that'll go into this tank for 50 seconds or so, and some parts that won't go into that tank at all. Now, previously, what we've done to make sure that we don't, etch zero etch parts or vice versa or something like that, is we just visually, we're checking through a big stack of paperwork or something like that. We have a lot of customers that send us, 7 parts in an order, but they're small parts, and we want to make a flight bar full of parts, so we will cram, a stack of paper this thick on there sometimes. And we've got to look through all of those, and if someone back there doesn't catch that there is different etch times on there, then it's up to us to flip through there and check all of that stuff. Well, with Steelhead, if we have a zero etch bar or a couple zero etch bars on a bar that normally gets etched, as soon as I get to this thing, I'll see on my scanner those 2 individual flight bars will break apart, and I'll see that happen. So I'm immediately reminded, like, oh, okay, make sure to pull those bars off. That was a pretty common error that we'd have in the past, because it's just so easy when you're flipping through a stack of 20 papers to miss the one paper where it says, oh, this part doesn't get etched. And especially when we've got a lot of stuff going on, we're usually pretty busy in here, jumping between different tasks. So it's a really easy thing to miss. So that was one of our big points of contention we would have in regards to user error and making mistakes on parts. And that's drastically gone down since then. So it's been good. It was pretty intuitive overall.